My son died 18 hours ago, but today at 5 in the morning he checked in for a flight to Miami. While my daughter-in-law skillfully played the role of a grieving widow, I opened the bag my son had left me at the airport with trembling hands. $20,000 and a voice recorder. I pressed play and couldn't believe my ears. My daughter-in-law started crying. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Ernest Coleman. I'm 68 years old and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. For 31 years, I sat in courtrooms across Davidson County as an official court reporter, transcribing every word spoken under oath, every denial, every carefully constructed lie. You develop a particular sense for deception when that's your work. You learn to hear the pause before an answer. You learn to watch what people do with their hands. I retired in 2019, and I thought the courtrooms were behind me forever. I live at 2214 Hilldale Drive in East Nashville, a 3-story house I built in 1989. These days it doesn't feel much like mine. My son David was 41 years old when he died. Sudden cardiac failure, the official report said. He was cautious, careful, didn't smoke, ran 3 miles every Thursday. 41 years old. The kind of death that doesn't make sense until later. It makes a terrible kind of sense. I need to tell you about Tara before I tell you what happened after the funeral. David met her 4 years ago at a work dinner. She was striking in the way certain people are striking. Beautiful in a way that works best when other people are watching. She had a son already, Brett, 22, with a jaw set in permanent mild contempt for everyone around him. When David introduced her to me, she shook my hand like she was doing me a favor. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I am, by nature, a patient observer. 31 years of transcribing other people's words at their worst and most desperate will either make you cynical or careful. I chose careful. I told myself that first impressions are rarely the whole story, that David was happy, and that my job was not to be his judge. What I watched over the following months was Tara moving into every corner of David's finances, the way water moves into a cracked foundation. Slowly, with total commitment. She suggested a joint account for household expenses. She started handling the bills. She mentioned twice that David seemed overwhelmed, and maybe she should manage his banking apps just to help. David was a good man, which sometimes means a man who doesn't see certain things coming. Brett moved in 6 months after the wedding. He told David he needed a few months to get his dropshipping business running. That was 2 years ago. His business consisted, as far as I could observe, of sitting on my living room couch with a laptop and periodically asking his mother for money. He called me the old man. Not to my face, at first, but houses carry sound differently than people expect, and I heard it. I filed it away. That's what I do. The funeral was on a Thursday. 53 people came. Tara wore black with remarkable composure and accepted condolences with lowered eyes and a soft, practiced grief. Brett stood slightly behind her the whole time, the precise position that looks respectful in photographs, without requiring him to speak to anyone. I noticed that too. We came back to the house afterward. My brother Raymond stayed 2 hours, then drove back to Chattanooga. Then I was alone with Tara and Brett. Within 20 minutes of walking through the door, Tara was on her phone in the living room, speaking in a low, even voice, and with one hand working through the mail on the side table, pulling a bank envelope halfway out and reading the return address. She felt me looking. She put it down and turned with an expression of such swift, seamless grief that I almost second-guessed myself. Almost. Upstairs, Brett's music started, not background noise, the kind that tests the structural integrity of plaster. The kind that says, I am here. I am comfortable. This house is as much mine as anyone's. I made coffee. I stood at the counter and thought, my son has been dead less than 8 hours, and his wife is reading my mail, while her son rattles the windows above my head. Something is wrong. I didn't know yet the exact shape of it, but 31 years of courtroom instinct told me to pay very close attention. I drank the coffee and said nothing to either of them for the rest of the night. The following morning at 8:40, my phone rang. A Nashville number I didn't recognize. Mr. Coleman? The voice was young and professionally apologetic. "My name is Charlie Griffin. I'm calling from Nashville International, Terminal C, passenger services and lost property." A brief pause. "Your son, David Coleman, checked in for an early flight this morning. He checked a bag at the counter and left it. The baggage tag has your name on it and this phone number." I set down my coffee cup very carefully. "He checked in," I said, "this morning." "Yes, sir. The 5 a.m. departure to Miami. But he never boarded. He left the bag at the counter, walked through the terminal, and left the building." "My son had been in the ground for less than 18 hours. I said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes. I put on my coat. I walked past Tara's closed door, past Brett's closed door, through the silent house. I got in my car and pulled out of the driveway with both hands on the wheel and a single thought running steady and quiet as a metronome. David left me something. It's 22 miles to Nashville International from East Nashville. Mostly highway, the kind of drive that gives you time to think whether you want it or not. That morning, I didn't want it. I got it anyway." The last month played back in pieces. Specifically, 2 visits. David had come to my workshop garage twice in his final 6 weeks. The garage is detached at the back of the property, a 12 by 20 space I've filled over the years with a work table, a magnifying lamp, and the organized clutter that only makes sense to the person who built it. I restore antique pocket watches there. A 1962 Illinois Bun Special has been sitting under the lamp for 3 months, the movement half disassembled, waiting. When David was younger, he'd sit on the stool by the door and watch me work. He used to say it was the only place in the world where nothing was urgent. He came twice that last month. Both times he sat on that stool, and both times he left, without saying what he'd come to say. The second visit, he stood in the doorway for 10 minutes talking about nothing. Weather, the predators season, and then said, "Dad, if I ever," and stopped. Tried again. "If something happened," and then Tara called from the house, and he went. I thought it was cancer. That's where a man my age goes first. I gave him space because I thought space was what he needed. He wasn't working up to a diagnosis. He was working up to the truth about his wife. Charlie Griffin met me at the passenger services desk in Terminal C. Young, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but handling it with quiet decency. He'd looked up the death record. He knew. He brought out the bag without making it worse. It was old navy blue, a soft-sided carry-on, the color of a deep bruise. On the interior fabric lining in black permanent marker, D. Coleman, not a label. Written directly into the fabric in David's handwriting. I would know it anywhere. I carried it to my car on level 2 of the parking structure and sat with it in my lap before opening it. His passport was on top. Below it, an unsealed white envelope. Inside, 20 stacks of bills, each banded with a paper strip. $20,000 in cash, arranged with the careful precision of a man who needed his father to understand. This was not an accident. Under the envelope, a digital voice recorder. The cheap kind, black plastic, the size of a deck of cards. $29 at Target. On the back, a post-it note. The adhesive faded, but still holding, in David's handwriting, "Dad, press play." I pressed play. The ambient hiss of a room I recognized immediately. The kitchen at 2214 Hilldale Drive. The refrigerator hum, the particular flatness of sound on tile floors. Then Tara's voice, clear and businesslike. "If the old man draws up a new power of attorney before we move, the whole thing collapses. I already talked to Hunter. He says we can establish incapacity through 2 physicians. It just needs documentation going back far enough." Brett, flatter, slightly bored. "What if he goes to a lawyer?" Tara, "He won't. He doesn't suspect anything. He just sits in that garage with his watches." I turned off the recorder. I sat in the parking structure and looked at the concrete wall 4 feet in front of me, and I thought about the past 4 years, about the way Tara had moved through the house from the beginning. Not like a guest, not even like a resident, but like a surveyor, taking stock, measuring. About Brett calling me the old man through walls I had built with my own money. About David on the stool in the garage, turning that Hamilton watch in his hands, saying it runs perfectly now and not being able to say the rest of what he came to say. He had known? Not everything, but enough. He had spent his last weeks not telling me he was afraid. He had spent them building me this. A passport to establish his identity and legal presence of mind, $20,000 to fund whatever came next, and 30 seconds of audio recorded in his own kitchen. I know what evidence is. I spent 31 years in courtrooms. I know what one-party consent means in the state of Tennessee, and I know what TCA Section 39-13-601 says about recordings made by a participant in a conversation. David had been in that kitchen. David had made that recording. Whatever attorney Hunter Valls and his 2 cooperative physicians had planned, they had not planned for a dead man who did his homework first. There are 2 kinds of people in a deposition: those who believe they're the smartest person in the room, and those who are actually prepared. In 31 years, I never once saw the first type win. I put the recorder back in the bag, zipped it shut, pulled out my phone. I searched. Estate attorney, Nashville, Tennessee, probate litigation. The 3rd result was Lindsay Reed, J.D., 315 Church Street, Suite 507, specializing in probate and estate disputes. One reviewer described her as not someone you want on the other side of a table. I called, got an automated message. I left a voicemail. My son had recently passed. His estate was about to be contested in bad faith. I had documentation that would be relevant, and I needed a meeting tomorrow morning. I kept my voice level. I've had a lot of practice keeping my voice level. I set the phone on the passenger seat and looked at the bag in my lap. He just sits in that garage with his watches, Tara had said. She was right about one thing. I do sit in the garage with my watches. I take apart movements that have been frozen for decades, and I find exactly what went wrong, and I fix them, piece by piece, until they run perfectly again. It requires patience. It requires precision. It requires the willingness to dismantle something completely before you can restore it. I started the car. That's exactly what I was about to do. The next morning, I called Lindsay Reed's office at 9:02. A real person answered this time and told me Ms. Reed could fit me in at 11:30. I wrote down the address I already had, 315 Church Street, Suite 507, and said I'd be there. I spent the 2 hours before the appointment doing something I'm very good at, sitting still and paying attention. Tara came downstairs at 9:45, dressed carefully, not black this time, but a quiet gray that said grieving but functional. A costume change I clocked immediately. She made herself coffee without offering any to me. She stood at the counter with her phone, and every 30 seconds she glanced toward the hallway where David's study was. The door was closed. I had locked it the previous evening. She didn't try the handle. She just looked at it. Twice. The way you look at something that should be yours but isn't yet. Brett came down at 10:20 in sleepwear that had seen better decades. He stood in front of the open refrigerator for a full minute, then closed it without taking anything, and said to no one in particular, "We need groceries." I was at the kitchen table with the newspaper. I looked up at him. He held my eyes for about 1 second, then found something on the ceiling that apparently required his full attention. He went back upstairs. That was the arrangement in the house I had built with my own hands. The house where I had raised David. The house where, according to the plan I now understood, I was meant to be the background noise, the inconvenient old man sitting in his garage, not paying attention. I drained my coffee. I went to Church Street. Lindsay Reed was mid-40s, precise posture, the kind that develops from years of sitting across tables from difficult people. She shook my hand and said, "Tell me everything. Don't summarize. I'll decide what matters." So I talked. 40 minutes. She didn't interrupt once. She wrote on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I couldn't read from across the desk. When I finished, she set down her pen. "The recording, you still have it?" "In my car. Tennessee is one-party consent under TCA 39-13-601. If David initiated the recording and was present, he's the consenting party. It's admissible. The passport helps establish the bag was his. The handwriting will need authentication, but that's manageable." She tapped her pen. "Has she moved on the estate yet?" "Nothing's arrived." "Give it a week, maybe 2. She leaned back slightly. "In the meantime, don't change anything in that house. Don't ask them to leave. Don't escalate. The moment you do, you hand them a narrative. Grieving widow, difficult father-in-law. Let them be comfortable. Comfortable people make mistakes. She recommended a private investigator named Claude Wilson on Eastland Avenue. Thorough, not given to unnecessary conversation. Exactly what I needed. I drove back to Hilldale Drive with a clearer head than I'd had in 3 days. What I found stopped me in the hallway. David's study had been emptied. Not ransacked, emptied with the efficiency of someone who knew exactly how much time they had. 6 sealed cardboard boxes in the hallway, each labeled in black marker, "Donate." I made 4 trips, 6 boxes to the garage, stacked against the back wall. I locked the deadbolt and kept the key on my person. When Tara returned an hour later, she walked past the empty hallway without a word. Through the kitchen window, I could see her standing very still, looking out toward the garage. I was at the work table. I caught her eye through both panes of glass, and I smiled. Small, pleasant, entirely genuine. She turned away. She couldn't have known that the smile was not confusion or courtesy. It was the expression of a man who has just moved his most important pieces off the board before his opponent could reach them. That night, around 11, the power in the garage went out. Not the house, just the garage. The exterior breaker panel, accessible from outside. I heard the click and sat in sudden darkness with 6 boxes of David's files and the pocket watch under the lamp. I sat there for a moment, listening to the quiet. The house was completely silent. No music from upstairs, no television, nothing. Just the dark garage and the faint smell of machine oil and old paper. Then I took the flashlight from the second drawer of the work table, where I have kept one for 22 years, because I am a man who plans for the obvious. And I kept working. Past 1 in the morning, near the bottom of the 4th box, I found it. A printed email chain in a folder marked Correspondence. MISC 2024. 6 messages between Tara's address and one belonging to someone identified in the signature block as H. Valls, attorney at law. The first message was dated in early December, 3 months before David died. The subject line read, Timeline, revised. I read every word by flashlight, and by the time I finished, my hands were completely steady. They had been planning this since December. Claude Wilson's office was on the 2nd floor above a coffee shop on Eastland Avenue. Stairs on the outside of the building, which I found either charming or telling. He called me back within an hour of my message, in a voice that didn't waste syllables. Rate is $1,800 for a basic financial trace. 2 weeks, sometimes less. I need names, known addresses, whatever account information you already have. I don't need to know why. I appreciate that, I said. We met the following afternoon. Wilson was somewhere in his 50s, lean with the careful eyes of a man who watches other people for a living without being watched back. His office had a desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and nothing on the walls. Just the tools. I gave him what I had, Tara's full name, addresses, David's financial institutions, Fifth Third Bank, and a credit union on Nolensville Pike, and the name Hunter Valls from the email chain. I handed him photographs of the emails I'd taken by flashlight the night before. He looked at them without expression. How'd you come by these? They were in my son's files, in my garage, on my property. One nod. Sufficient. While Wilson worked, I did what Reed had told me to do. Nothing visible. I was present, polite, unremarkable. I ate breakfast in the kitchen while Tara moved around me with the practiced ease of someone performing for an audience. Brett brought people over 3 nights that week. Loud, late, entirely comfortable in a house that wasn't theirs. I documented all of it. Dates, times, descriptions, in a small notebook in my shirt pocket. 31 years of transcription instinct doesn't disappear on retirement. It just waits for something worth recording. On the 9th day, Tara slipped an envelope under my bedroom door. Inside, 1 handwritten page on notepaper. It explained carefully and at some length that as David's widow, she had an emotional connection to the house that deserved thoughtful consideration. It suggested a mutually beneficial arrangement regarding the property. And near the bottom, almost as an aside, I'm sure we both know that prolonged stress isn't good for anyone's health, especially at a certain age. The right doctors would certainly agree. I read it twice. I put it in the folder I had labeled with quiet satisfaction, Exhibit A. On day 11, Wilson called and came to the coffee shop downstairs rather than his office. He set a 9-page printed report on the table and walked me through it without preamble. Tara had opened a personal account at Regions Bank the previous October, 5 months before David died. Between October and February, that account received 11 transfers, totaling $34,200. All 11 were initiated from David's mobile banking application. All 11 occurred between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. That's when a person is asleep, I said, or when someone else has their phone. Wilson said. He turned to page 4. There's more. The previous November, a notary on Murfreesboro Road received a request from a woman matching Tara Coleman's description to prepare a durable power of attorney on behalf of David Coleman. The notary refused. The principal is required to appear in person. She left without incident. Durable power of attorney. If completed, Tara would have had full legal authority to act on David's behalf. Financial decisions, property transfers, everything, without his involvement. The notary refused, so they moved to the next phase. Wait, then challenge the will. Volleys, I said. Did you find anything? Civil attorney, licensed in Tennessee since 2018. Primarily estate litigation. He represented a client, possibly under an alias, in a probate dispute in Shelby County in 2022. Settled out of court. Wilson closed the report. Pattern. I paid him $1,800 in cash from David's envelope. It felt like the right source. I brought everything to read that afternoon. She read Wilson's report while I sat across from her. When she looked up, her expression was businesslike, which in my experience means the news is useful. I'll file a formal request for a financial audit of the joint accounts through probate court, she said, and I want you to notify Fifth Third Bank in writing, through my office, that the estate is under legal review. No access to the safe deposit box without a court order. She hasn't tried the bank yet? Not yet. But she has the same thought you do. Reed picked up her pen. Mr. Coleman, I want to be direct. What Wilson found, combined with the recording, gives us a strong position. But this will take months, and you are living in that house with people who haven't stopped. I know, I said. Are you managing? I thought about the flashlight in the second drawer, the notebook in my shirt pocket, the 6 boxes locked in the garage, the smile through 2 panes of glass. I spent 31 years in rooms with people who thought they were the only ones paying attention, I said. I manage fine. I drove home as the light went flat and gray over East Nashville. I was almost at the driveway when my phone rang. Reed. She filed this afternoon, she said. Tara Coleman has petitioned to contest the will. Grounds, undue influence and lack of testamentary capacity. A pause. The hearing is about 3 months out. I sat in the car and looked at the house. 3 months. I had a recorder, a 9-page financial report, an email chain from December, and a letter that had essentially threatened my health in writing. I had time, patience, and the clarity that comes from knowing exactly what pieces are on the board. I went inside. I said good evening to Tara. Good evening to Brett. Neither answered. I went to the garage and picked up the 1962 Illinois Bun Special. The mainspring seated perfectly. I closed the case, wound it 3 turns. It ticked, steady, measured, without hurry. 3 months is more than enough, I thought. I knew precisely what came next. The hearing was 3 months away. I spent those months the way I had spent 31 years in courtrooms, building the record. Reed's first instruction, delivered over the phone 2 days after Tara filed her petition, was specific. Install a camera in the garage. Document everything they do on your property. Dates, times, witnesses where possible. We want a pattern, not just incidents. I drove to Best Buy on Gallatin Pike the next morning and spent $189 on a compact security camera with wide-angle lens and cloud storage. I mounted it above the garage door, angled to cover the full interior and the approach from outside. I set up the app on my phone. The whole job took 40 minutes. That same afternoon, Brett cut the power to the garage again. The camera had already uploaded 4 hours to cloud storage before the power cut. He walked into the frame for 11 seconds, face fully visible, hand going to the exterior breaker panel, clear as midday. I noted it in the notebook. Date, time, description. The folder in my bedroom had grown from one manila envelope to a 2-inch binder. The weeks settled into a rhythm. Tara performed the patient widow. Grief present but not excessive. Requests framed as considerations. Voice always level. She was genuinely good at it. Brett was less disciplined. He brought people over that first weekend, 4 of them, staying past midnight in my living room, at a volume that suggested they believed the house existed for their convenience alone. I wrote down arrival time, departure time, and noted the 6 beer cans by the recycling bin the next morning. I photographed them. 6 cans are not a legal case, but patterns are made of small things. About 2 weeks in, Reed called to say Tara had tried to access David's safe deposit box at Fifth Third Bank on West End Avenue. The bank had received our written notice and refused. The branch manager called Reed directly. Tara had been completely polite about it, thanked the woman at the desk, and left. She thanked her? I said, which tells me she has a backup plan. Reed paused. The motion for financial audit is filed. We should have court-ordered access to the joint account records in 3 to 4 weeks. I kept working through the garage boxes, mostly routine, tax returns, warranties, old insurance correspondence, the kind of accumulated paper a careful man keeps and never expects anyone to read. I went through them systematically, an hour at a time, starting from the earliest year and working forward. I had a yellow legal pad beside me, the same kind Reed used, and I noted anything that seemed significant. An insurance policy I didn't recognize, a credit card statement from an account I'd never heard David mention, a warranty card for a laptop that Brett, I later confirmed, was currently using upstairs. Each item went into a pile. Each pile went into a folder. Each folder went into the binder. In the 5th box, in an unlabeled folder, I found a printout. It was a series of emails between David and a cardiologist on Charlotte Pike. December and January, 6 weeks before he died. David was describing symptoms: sudden fatigue, occasional dizziness, a heaviness in his chest he said felt different from anxiety, which he knew how to recognize. In the 4th message, he asked, carefully, whether such symptoms could result from something in his diet. Not an accusation, just a man trying to understand his own body. The doctor recommended an in-person appointment. David had never made it. I sat with the paper for a while. I thought about December, about David coming to the garage twice, and standing in the doorway and not finishing his sentences, about the Hamilton watch he turned in his hands, and the thing he almost said. He hadn't just been afraid. He had been trying to document what was happening to him quietly, alone, the same way I had documented other people's proceedings for 3 decades. He just hadn't known where to send it. He hadn't known yet that the right person to send it to was sitting 40 feet away in a garage, working on a pocket watch. I brought the printout to Reed the next morning. I told her what I thought it meant. I told her I wanted her to take it to the district attorney's office. She looked at the pages carefully. "This changes the nature of the case," she said, "significantly. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," I said. 3 days later, she called. Her voice was quieter than usual. "I met with an investigator at the DA's office this afternoon," she said. "They're opening a preliminary inquiry into the circumstances of David's death. Not a formal case yet, but they're looking." A pause. "Tara doesn't know." Outside, I heard Tara's car pull into the driveway. I watched through the kitchen window as she came up the front walk, handbag over her shoulder, composed, unhurried. She didn't know that across town someone had just opened a folder with her name on it. The hearing was on a Tuesday morning at the Davidson County Courthouse on 2nd Avenue North, a building I had walked through hundreds of times over 31 years, though never from this side of the bar. I arrived 40 minutes early and sat in the second row with Reed. She had her files arranged with the precision of someone who had tried a great many cases and hadn't lost the ones she'd cared about. Tara arrived with Hunter Voles, mid-30s, well-fitted suit, the practiced confidence of a man accustomed to walking into rooms and controlling them. He acknowledged Judge Morris with the careful nod of someone managing impressions. Brett arrived separately and took a seat in the gallery. He caught my eye and looked away. Judge Morris was a woman in her 60s with silver-streaked hair and the bearing of someone who had heard every variation of human difficulty and maintained, barely, the willingness to be surprised. The hearing began at 9. Volleys presented in 12 minutes. Undue influence by the father, lack of testamentary capacity at the time of signing, 2 physician witnesses. The first doctor had seen David once the previous October, a general wellness visit. He testified that David had seemed confused about certain details and not fully present. Under Reed's cross-examination, he confirmed he had conducted no standard cognitive assessment. He confirmed not fully present was not a clinical term. He confirmed that a single wellness visit was not a basis for a diagnosis of incapacity. His answers grew shorter as the questions continued. The second witness had never met David in person. He had reviewed a symptom description provided by Tara and formed an opinion that David may have experienced cognitive decline. Reed asked pleasantly whether he had reviewed David's actual medical records. He had not. She asked whether forming clinical opinions about a patient he had never examined, based on a description from an interested party in a legal proceeding, was standard practice. He said the situation was unusual. Judge Morris wrote something down. Then Reed said, "Your Honor, we'd like to submit a piece of evidence directly relevant to the credibility of this petition." She handed copies to the clerk and to Valls simultaneously. Valls looked at the transcript summary. Something moved in his jaw, not a reaction, more the suppression of one. Objection. This recording was made without the knowledge or consent of the parties. Reed turned to him with an expression of patient explanation. Under TCA 39-13-601, Tennessee requires consent from only one party to a conversation. David Coleman initiated this recording and was present throughout. He is the consenting party. She faced the judge. We're prepared to submit the physical recorder, the bag it was found in, authentication of the handwriting on the label and the accompanying note, and a signed receipt from Nashville International Airport, documenting chain of custody from the moment of retrieval. Judge Morris looked at the transcript, then at Valls. Counsel? He made one more attempt at chain of custody. Reed addressed it in 4 sentences. The judge admitted the recording. The clerk played it through the evidence speaker. I had heard those 30 seconds many times. Hearing them in a courtroom, the refrigerator hum, the flat tile sound of my own kitchen, was something different. If the old man draws up a new power of attorney before we move, the whole thing collapses. I already talked to Hunter. He says we can establish incapacity through 2 physicians. I watched Tara. She sat with her hands folded on the table and did not move. Not a flinch, not a visible breath. Whatever was happening behind that composure was invisible. I give her credit. It was a masterful performance under the worst possible conditions. Brett was not masterful. He had come as moral support, which proved to be an educational choice. When the recording reached his own voice, what if he goes to a lawyer? He put one hand flat on the gallery rail, steadying himself. The color had left his face around the first sentence and hadn't come back. His mouth was slightly open, the expression of someone watching a structure collapse and realizing too late they were inside it. I had seen that face in courtrooms before, the face of a person encountering a consequence they had considered purely theoretical. Judge Morris adjourned for review and scheduled a continuation roughly 2 months out. The room began to empty. I put on my coat. Reed was already organizing her files with the calm of a woman who knew how the morning had gone. In the corridor outside, Tara caught up to me. She moved with purpose but not urgency, still controlled, always controlled, until she was beside me and I stopped. You don't understand what you're getting into, she said, low voice, even tone, but something behind it had worn thin. I looked at her. I thought about David in December, writing careful emails to a doctor he never got to see again. I thought about the garage in the dark and the flashlight and an email chain marked timeline, revised. 3 decades of sitting still while people said things they believed no one could prove otherwise. I spent 31 years recording people who lied under oath, I said quietly. You're beginners. I walked to the elevator. I didn't look back. Behind me, nothing. Not a word, not a step following. Just the marble corridor of Davidson County Courthouse, and the particular silence that falls when someone finally understands the situation they are actually in. The financial audit results came through Reed's office about 3 weeks after the hearing. She called on a Wednesday morning and said I should come in that afternoon. 5th floor, Suite 507. The same slightly crooked Tennessee state seal in the waiting area. I had started to think of it as a reliable landmark. Reed set the 31-page forensic audit report on the desk between us. The $34,200 that had moved from David's account to Tara's Region's bank account was now fully documented. 11 transfers, all initiated between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m., all from David's mobile banking application. The forensic accountant had gone further, working through the bank's records in response to the court order. She had identified the IP addresses associated with each transaction. 10 of the 11 matched a device registered to Brett Shaw, not David's phone. Brett's. I sat with that for a moment. David had been asleep, or incapacitated, and Brett had been sitting somewhere in my house, in the room I'd built, under the roof I'd paid for, using his own device to move money from his stepfather's account to his mother's, in the middle of the night, 11 times. The report also addressed the insurance policy. David had held a $150,000 life insurance policy since 2019, naming his father as primary beneficiary. In September of the previous year, 6 months before David died, the beneficiary designation had been changed to Tara Coleman. The change had been processed through an online portal. The IP address for that transaction also matched Brett's device. I had found the original policy in the garage boxes, the 2019 version signed by David, naming me. It was in the same folder as the email chain and the cardiologist correspondence. The folder David had apparently never emptied, the one Tara had labeled Donate without opening. She had not known what was in those boxes. That was her first and most consequential mistake. I brought copies of the insurance documents to Garrett at the DA's office myself, not through Reed, not through any intermediary. He looked at the policy change documentation for a long time. The IP address on this matches the others, he said, according to the audit report. He nodded slowly. I got the impression Garrett was the kind of man who did not express satisfaction about things that hadn't yet concluded. But something in his posture had changed. The investigation was expanding. Tara hired a new attorney, not Volley's, someone more expensive, a man whose name I recognized from news coverage of a Nashville fraud case 2 years prior. He had gotten his client a reduced charge. That told me 2 things. Tara now understood the situation she was in, and she had access to significant money somewhere. The $34,200 from the Region's account, possibly, or a reserve she'd been building quietly in ways the audit hadn't yet reached. It was that same week that she came to the garage. I was at the work table. The bun special, which I had long since finished, had been replaced by a newer project, a 1947 Hamilton that a shop on Gallatin Pike had sent over. The balance staff cracked. I heard footsteps on the gravel outside, then a knock on the frame of the open door. Tara stood in the doorway. She was dressed carefully, as always, but something in the usual composure had shifted. Not broken, not visible to most people, but I had spent 31 years reading rooms. She was measuring something. "I think we should talk," she said. I put down the balance staff. I gestured to the stool by the door, the same stool David used to sit on. She didn't sit. She stood with her hands folded in front of her and delivered her offer in a voice that had been practiced into evenness. She would withdraw the will contest petition, fully and unconditionally, if I agreed to allow her and Brett to remain in the house for 1 additional year, and if I agreed to a payment of $50,000 from the estate as a settlement. I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I said, "I'll think about it." She nodded once and left. I waited until I heard the back door of the house close. Then I reached into the drawer of the work table and took out the small black recorder, the same one David had left in the bag, the one that had played in the Davidson County Courthouse 3 weeks earlier. I had put new batteries in it the day after the hearing. I pressed stop. I had pressed record the moment I heard her footsteps on the gravel outside. The offer, the specific terms, the dollar amount, the arrangement she was proposing, was now documented. An offer made to the opposing party in active litigation, outside the presence of counsel, recorded with my own knowledge and consent, legal, clear, and useful in ways she hadn't considered. I set the recorder back in the drawer. I picked up the cracked balance staff. I thought, she still thinks she can negotiate her way out of this. My phone rang 2 evenings later. It was Garrett from the DA's office, calling from a number I'd saved after our first meeting. His voice had the particular quality of someone delivering news that is significant and not good. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "I want you to know that a judge has signed an order for exhumation. The toxicology work will begin early next month." A pause. "I thought you should hear it from me directly." I said, "Thank you for telling me." I sat in the kitchen after the call with the phone on the table and the house quiet above me. Tara's door was closed. Brett was somewhere upstairs. Neither of them knew what had just been approved by a Davidson County judge. Whatever happened next, David was going to be heard. The toxicology results took just over 3 weeks. I knew the examiner had begun the work. I did not call Garrett. I did not ask Reed to check on the timeline. I went to the garage each morning and worked on the Hamilton and made notes in my binder and ate meals in my own kitchen and said good morning to 2 people who were waiting for a different outcome than the one that was coming. The call came at 7:31 in the morning. Reed, not Garrett. She had been informed first through the legal channel. I was in the garage with the Hamilton open on the work table, the balance staff replaced, the movement reassembled. The 1962 Bun Special was on the shelf above the door, running perfectly. I had put it there 3 weeks ago. "Ernest," Reed said. She had never called me by my first name before. "The toxicology report is back. Elevated digoxin levels in David's tissue samples. The medical examiner's assessment is that the concentrations are inconsistent with any known prescription or supplement David was taking. They're consistent with sustained low-dose administration over several months." I set the phone on the work table. I looked at the wall above the bench for a moment. Digoxin, a cardiac medication. In small doses, administered over time without the recipient's knowledge, it disrupts the heart's rhythm, creates the conditions for exactly the kind of sudden failure that had killed my healthy 41-year-old son on a Wednesday morning in March. David had known something was wrong. He had written to a cardiologist, asking if something in his diet could explain what he was feeling. The doctor had recommended an appointment. David had never made it. I picked up the phone. "What happens now?" "Garrett is executing search warrants this morning for the house, Tara's vehicle, and financial records beyond what the audit already covered." A pause. "He expects to bring both of them in for questioning today." I looked through the garage window at the back of the house. The kitchen light was on. I could see movement through the glass. "Should I do anything?" I asked. "Go about your morning," she said. "You've already done everything that needed doing." I sat in the garage and held the unfinished Hamilton in my hands, not working on it, just holding it, and thought about David. Not the David of the last year, the one I'd been too slow to read correctly. The David of 2018, on the bank of Priest Lake with a fishing rod and a bad hat, turning to grin at a camera he'd set up on a rock. The David who used to sit on this stool and say it was the only place where nothing was urgent. At 9:15, 2 Davidson County unmarked vehicles pulled up outside. I heard the front door. Voices. 2 detectives introducing themselves. Formal and even. Tara's voice still controlled for approximately 45 seconds before it broke into something I hadn't heard from her before. Not calculated, not composed. Something real. Brett's voice was shorter. 3 words. "I didn't know?" repeated twice in quick succession. Then silence. They were both brought in for questioning. I watched from the kitchen window as Tara walked to one of the vehicles. She did not look toward the garage. That same night, according to Reed, who called again at nearly 10 o'clock, Brett gave a full statement to the DA's office. In exchange for cooperation and a recommendation of leniency, he confirmed what the IP evidence had already shown, that he had made the transfers, that he had changed the insurance beneficiary, that he had done these things at his mother's direction, and that he had believed, had been told, that it was simply managing finances for a man who was too stressed to deal with it. He said he hadn't known about the digoxin. Garrett, according to Reed, believed him. The continuation hearing before Judge Morris came roughly 2 weeks later. Tara's new attorney moved to postpone. Reed opposed. Judge Morris denied the postponement, heard the updated evidence summary, and issued her ruling from the bench. The petition to contest David's will was dismissed in full. The will stood. The house at 2214, Hilldale Drive, East Nashville, the house I had built in 1989, the house David grew up in, was legally, unambiguously mine. The savings account of $87,500 transferred to my name. The $34,200 was ordered returned as fraudulently obtained funds, recoverable through civil action. I sat in the second row of that courtroom, and I did not feel what I might have expected to feel. Not relief exactly, not satisfaction, something quieter, the particular stillness of a room after a long argument has finally ended. On the way out of the courthouse, Reed walked beside me. She said, "The DA's office will be in touch about the formal charges. That will be a separate proceeding." "I know," I said. "You handled this well," she said, which, from Lindsay Reed, was the equivalent of a standing ovation. I drove back to Hilldale Drive. The house was empty. Tara under conditional release, Brett already making arrangements to leave. I walked through the rooms alone for the first time in months, through the particular quiet of a house where no one is performing for anyone. That evening, the Davidson County District Attorney's Office formally charged Tara Coleman with first-degree intentional homicide. The announcement came through Reed by phone and through the local news shortly after. The hearing was scheduled for late October, about 6 weeks out. 6 weeks. I had waited longer for less. The house was quiet for the first time in 2 years, not just temporarily quiet, the way it had been on the occasional morning when Tara left early and Brett slept until noon. Genuinely quiet, the kind that settles into rooms when the people who had been performing in them are gone. Tara was under conditional release pending trial, required to stay at a rented apartment on the other side of town and check in with a pretrial officer twice a week. Brett had left for Memphis 3 days after giving his statement, with a duffel bag and the laptop he'd bought on David's credit card, which I noted and passed along to Reed for the civil recovery file. I walked through the house alone on the first morning after they'd cleared out. Not quickly, room by room, slowly, the way you move through a space when you're reclaiming it rather than just occupying it. The living room, 4 scuff marks on the baseboard from Brett's furniture, an energy drink ring on the side table that hadn't been there before. The kitchen, a cabinet door slightly off its hinge, which I fixed with a screwdriver in about 4 minutes. The staircase, a chip in the plaster on the second landing that I didn't remember being there. I noted all of it without anger. They were cosmetic. The house was sound. David's room was at the end of the second-floor hall. Tara had redecorated it after the wedding. Neutral gray walls, the furniture repositioned, the small bookshelf David had kept since high school replaced with a decorative unit that held nothing anyone had ever read. The gray was the color of a waiting room. I bought 2 gallons of the original shade, a medium blue, the kind that looks different at different hours of the day, from the hardware store on Gallatin Pike. I painted the room myself over 2 weekends, rolling the color back onto walls that had held it for 15 years before she arrived. It is a small thing, I know that, but it was the right small thing. In the 3rd week of work on the room, clearing the last of what Tara had left behind, I opened the drawer of the nightstand. It had been David's since he was 19. A plain oak piece I'd bought at an estate sale, nothing remarkable. Inside, a parking stub, a phone charger, and a photograph. The photograph was from a fishing trip to Priest Lake, several years earlier. David and I on the bank in the late afternoon light, both of us in the kind of hats you only wear when you're far enough from people that it doesn't matter. David was holding up a fish that was, in all honesty, unremarkably small, but his expression suggested he had just landed something of considerable significance. He was grinning. The camera was propped on a cooler. Neither of us had known how the photo had turned out until we got home. I sat on the edge of the bed and held it for a while. Then I took it to the garage and set it on the shelf above the work table, between the completed 1962 Bun Special and a pewter mug that had been there since before I could remember. David grinning at a small fish in a bad hat at a lake in Tennessee. That's a reasonable thing to have on a shelf. The civil recovery process ran in parallel through these weeks, handled by Reed with her usual economy of motion. The $34,200 from the Region's bank account was ordered returned through the civil judgment. The funds cleared to my account about 6 weeks after the criminal charges were formalized. The $150,000 insurance policy was a separate matter. The original beneficiary designation, naming me, was authenticated through the estate proceedings, and Tara's September change was challenged on the grounds of duress and fraud. That case was referred to the Tennessee Insurance Commission for investigation, a process that would take additional months, but Reed was confident about the outcome. The math, as it stood, the savings account of $87,500 restored to my name, the $34,200 recovered, the house at 2214 Hilldale Drive unambiguously mine, the insurance matter pending but moving in the right direction. I was not a rich man, I had never been a rich man, but I was exactly where I had been before Tara arrived, in my own house, with my own finances, with my son's estate handled the way he had wanted it handled. 2 days before the sentencing hearing, a letter arrived through Reed's office. It was from Tara's attorney, the expensive one, the fraud specialist, and it contained a formal offer. Tara would enter a guilty plea to a reduced charge of second-degree intentional homicide in exchange for a sentencing recommendation of 8 years, rather than the 25 the first-degree charge carried. I read the letter at the kitchen table with my coffee. I read it twice. Then I put it in an envelope, sealed it, and drove it to Garrett's office at the DA's office on James Robertson Parkway. I handed it to his assistant and said, "The decision belongs to the prosecutor, not to me." Garrett called me that afternoon. "You're sure?" he said. "It's not my call?" I said. "It never was. I just gathered the evidence." A pause. "We'll take it under advisement," he said. "Thank you, Mr. Coleman." I drove home. I went to the garage. I picked up the 1947 Hamilton, which I had been working on for the better part of 2 months. A cracked balance staff replaced, the mainspring reseated, the dial cleaned. I wound it. It ran. 2 things running that hadn't been running before. The sentencing hearing was on a Wednesday morning, late in October. The air in Nashville had turned cool the week before. Not cold, just the particular sharpness that comes when summer finally releases its hold on Tennessee and you can smell something other than heat. I wore the jacket I'd had for 12 years, the charcoal wool one I'd worn to court dozens of times, always from the other side of the bar. I drove to the Davidson County Courthouse on 2nd Avenue North and parked in the same structure where I'd parked for the hearing in June. Second row, same seat. Some habits are worth keeping. The courtroom filled steadily. Tara arrived with her attorney. She was dressed plainly, not the calculated composition she'd worn to earlier hearings. Her hands were folded in her lap, and she sat very still, looking at the table in front of her. She did not look toward the gallery. Whatever composure she had left was concentrated entirely on holding herself together for the next hour. Brett was not present. Under the terms of his cooperation agreement, he had no obligation to appear, and he hadn't. He was in Memphis, beginning 3 years of probation, carrying $18,000 in restitution obligations, and whatever weight comes from knowing what you are part of. I did not feel sorry for him. I also did not feel the need to add to it. Judge Morris took the bench at 9 o'clock. The DA's office had accepted the plea. Tara's attorney entered the guilty plea to second-degree intentional homicide under TCA, Section 39-13-210. The judge reviewed the plea agreement, confirmed that it had been entered voluntarily, and confirmed the terms. 15 years, no eligibility for early release consideration in the first 10. Judge Morris read the sentence in the same measured voice she used for everything. Not theatrical, not soft, just the language of a court doing its work. Tara sat without visible reaction until the final word of the sentence, when something in her shoulders moved. Not a collapse, not dramatic, just the small physical acknowledgement of a weight that had finally landed. Her attorney put a hand briefly on her arm. She nodded once, to no one in particular. I watched all of it. I did not feel the satisfaction I might have expected. What I felt was something closer to the quiet at the end of a very long day of careful work. The kind that means you can put down the tools now because the thing that needed doing is done. Reed was beside me in the second row. As the courtroom began to clear, she said quietly, "That's as clean a resolution as I've seen in a case like this." "David did the work," I said. "I just carried it forward." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Take care of yourself, Ernest," and went to speak with the clerk. I sat in the row for another minute after the room emptied, just sitting, the way I used to sit in courtrooms at the end of a long session, after the transcript was complete and everyone had gone and the room was just a room again. There is a particular quality to an empty courtroom. The ceiling higher than it needs to be, the acoustics flat, the whole space designed for occasions that have just concluded. I got up. I put on my coat. I walked out through the marble corridor and down the elevator and through the lobby and out the front door of the Davidson County Courthouse onto Public Square. The light was thin and October clean. A few people on the steps. Traffic on James Robertson Parkway. The ordinary ongoing business of a city on a Wednesday morning, entirely indifferent to what had just happened inside. I stood on the top step and reached into my coat pocket. The 1962 Illinois Bun Special was there, the one I had been restoring when everything started, the one that had sat half disassembled under the lamp while I read cardiologist emails by flashlight. I had finished it weeks ago. It kept near perfect time, which for a movement of that age was something. I held it in my palm for a moment, the weight of it, the faint tick against my skin. David had liked this watch. He used to pick it up off the bench when he sat on the stool, turn it over in his hands, listen to it the way you listen to something that works exactly as it should. He never asked to keep it. He just liked knowing it was there. I wound it 2 turns, opened the case, looked at the dial, closed it again. He had known something was wrong, and he had not been able to say it, so he had built me something instead. A passport and $20,000 and 30 seconds of audio. A last act of the careful, patient man he had always been. The man I had raised in the house on Hilldale Drive, the one who used to sit on a stool in a garage and say it was the only place where nothing was urgent. He had trusted me to know what to do with it. I put the watch back in my pocket. I walked down the courthouse steps and across the square to where I'd parked the car. The drive back to Hilldale Drive was 20 minutes, and I took it without hurry, through the East Nashville streets I had lived among for 35 years. I pulled into the driveway at 2214 Hilldale Drive. The house was there, the way it had always been. The painted wood, the roof I'd replaced in 2011, the front walk that needed repointing in one section, the garage light I could see was on because I'd left it on when I'd left that morning. My house, my street, the only place I had ever particularly wanted to be. I got out of the car and went inside. If you liked this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.